We think under any election scenario, it's going to be really hard for Congress, whether controlled by Republicans or Democrats, to make those individual tax cuts permanent next year. They're going to be faced with a $1 trillion deficit, so they're going to want to try to pay for those. Democrats are going to propose increasing the corporate tax rate to make that happen, and Republicans are going to propose who knows what they're going to propose, how to pay for it, and that's going to be a big problem. So in an ideal world, those individual tax cuts would be made permanent, but it doesn't seem like it'll happen next year, and it doesn't need to because they don't expire till 2025.
If the GOP holds the House, which you give a 30% possibility to, you don't think that there, even under that scenario, you don't think that there could be a tax cut 2.0?
I think the real issue is what their majority is in the Senate. And, you know, we saw tax reform pass on this really weird vehicle called reconciliation that allows the senators that hold a simple majority in the Senate to pass the legislation on their own. So there is an argument that Republicans, even if they keep the Senate majority and if they maintain the House majority, which is less likely, they could use reconciliation again and pass it. The problem is that fighting within the party about how to pay for it and whether to pay for it, and it's just not going to be a unified caucus. It was really hard to get tax reform done.
Let's move on to infrastructure. Stephanie, how does that get done?
So infrastructure, the only way we see it getting done is under a divided Congress. Needs Democrats and Republicans to kind of hold hands and jump into that pool together and figure out, again, how to pay for it. They love the idea of spending money, but how to offset that in this deficit environment, it's going to be tough. We think they could do it with increased gas taxes at the federal level, but there's no way one party could easily own that. Again, Republicans are going to potentially turn to decreases in spending maybe on non-defense areas of federal policy. Democrats will turn to increasing that corporate tax rate, which is something that they continue to oppose, maybe to pay for it, but they won't. The two sides won't be able to come together on those issues, and so therefore we think maybe on an increased federal gas tax they could come to agreement. But again, we only put odds at 30%, even in a divided Congress, that they could find agreement there.
Let's move on to trade and the likelihood that the USMCA deal, which sounds like a Village People song to me, is going to get passed, no matter what happens.
I couldn't agree more about how it sounds, YMCA there. You know, the best chances for the president to get his renegotiated trade deal done is with Republicans in control of both chambers. But we still think a divided Congress, Democrats controlling the House, it'll probably be a Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump showdown. It will not look easy, but we think they can get it done. The real risk is if Democrats control both chambers, which is a low likelihood scenario. Trump's going to have a very big battle to wage there, trying to convince both chambers to even take the legislation up, let alone approve it.
You know, Stephanie, when we talk about the China tariffs, we don't talk about the House and the Senate, but could that have an impact on what sorts of negotiations actually get done with China, particularly as we head into the all-important G20 meeting later this month?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get that question from investors all the time. You know, a lot of these negotiations with China are really between the two administrations. The role that Congress will have potentially, especially if the House flips, is oversight of the trade negotiators, the U.S. Trade Representative, trying to remember that acronym. The USTR could be called in front of Congress, and others from his office, of Robert Lighthizer office, could end up being brought in to answer for some of the president's policies, and that would be a distraction mainly, but hard for Congress to do a lot to intervene with how the president and Chinese officials' negotiations are going.